Hello everyone, I'm Tim, the Church and Community Officer for IBEX based in Portsmouth, and I'm looking forward to the conversation about the use of video conferencing and our experiences of it.
Hello, I'm Lisa and I'm the chaplaincy coordinator for IBEX, and I will be joining with Tim in this conversation about video conferencing and our experience of it quite recently.
In my experience, literally just the last 2 or 3 weeks, it's through the necessity and through the suggestion, because obviously we're not able to meet face to face, and we needed to have an elders meeting at the church where I'm minister of, and we also were planning staff meetings and such like, and it was made necessity really, and it's worked out quite well so far.
Yes, I found that I had, before we used a video platform for IBEX, I'm a part-time student, and my course, which should have been residential, had to be at home. So I did sort of 3 intense days on the video platform trying to learn. But for me, the main reason is I've only just started at IBEX, and actually it was my way of actually looking and seeing some of the people, particularly that I'd never met before. And so actually for me it was quite useful to put names to faces, which actually makes it easier, certainly for me, as we're going on along this line, however long the lockdown goes on for. I've tried quite a few of them, I think. It's amazing to know how many there are there. I think Zoom is the one that most people probably have heard of, and that's certainly what we're using in the church. I use it for college. I'm also a parish councillor, and we started using it for council meetings. But I've also used, there's something called New Row, and also Microsoft Teams, and they're all more or less the same. That's what I've sort of found. I don't know if that's your experience, Tim.
Yes, I've had a more limited experience. I have on and off over the years tried to use Skype, not terribly successfully, although I did have a good Skype conversation with someone about 2 weeks ago now, so one of our training officers, and that gave me added confidence with using Skype. And obviously 3 weeks ago suddenly everybody was talking about Zoom, and we've used that, and I've found that quite useful. I was particularly pleased that, for instance, the meeting we had the other week was a board meeting. I was able to share material from from a PowerPoint, and we actually could have that on the screen and talk about it, as well as having our views on it as well. And I was quite impressed with that way that works. But I haven't had any experience of other sites. Presumably they can do similar things.
Yes, I think it is. I think that mostly it's just around what organisation you tend to be with. I've used Microsoft Zoom mainly because my husband works in a university, so that's why. I don't think I certainly wouldn't be able to say which was the best one. I just think they all seem, sort of much of a muchness to me. They all do what they just say on the tin, I think.
Well, for me, the great value is being able to see the person you're speaking to, and being able to judge reactions and so on, and tailor what you're trying to say to that. And particularly in our case, with working with Lisa, who's not having, apart from the interview, not having met her formally, it's been really nice to be able to interact and share. And that's been the great bonus to me. Speaking onto the phone has its value, of course, and you can get a sense of the person, but not being able to see them sometimes, now that you can communicate via this means, there's a real difference, I think, and that's a great bonus to this means of communication.
Yes, I've found it for me, it's actually being able to actually see you, Tim, and to see the other people at the board meeting as well. I think for me the difference is what the purpose is, because the telephone is good. I've had telephone conferences, and that's because I've known who everybody is. We've got a very fixed, tight agenda that we need to just work through, and we all know what we're doing. Whereas I think that on sessions like we had last Wednesday, which is where we're actually talking about ideas particularly, and sort of strategy type things. I think it's really useful, as you say, to be able to see people, because you can see body language, you get some idea of how your suggestion is sitting, rather than on the end of the phone. And that was certainly my experience of the last time that we all met together on the platform. I would have to say yes, and it's been around broadband capacity. I think as more and more people are using Wi-Fi and broadband for all sorts of things, that's been the main issue for me. You're in a call, you're getting into a conversation, and then suddenly it starts freezing, and that's one of the main sort of things that have been most frustrating that I've found with it.
Yes, in addition to that, I mean, we had the experience in a board meeting of one of our members who lives in deepest Dorset, and their signal kept dropping out, and in the end they became a black shape on the screen. We were still able to engage, and I was in a meeting just before this one on Zoom, and somebody kept dropping in and out as well. So there is a little bit of a digital divide if you are in a decent broadband area or not. That does seem to be a bit of an issue. There's also issues, I think, of how you start a meeting and people starting and joining at odd times. I've noticed that's being a bit issue. The first time we had a video conference by an elders meeting where people dropping in and out all the time, and it made it quite hard to actually chair and do the meetings. And more of a fun issue in a way, less serious in one sense, is thinking about backdrops, you know, because I'm thinking, you know, I've put in this one from a photo that adds a bit of interest and so on, but been picking up from some circles, you know, particularly on television, people talking about the different backdrops which people have, and it's starting to be used in a way, you know, you're viewing into people's homes, and you know, you've got a nice home and you've got a nice picture, it presents a certain image. Other people presenting the image, they're quite bookish and intellectual because they've got lots of books behind them. But what about the people who are less able to have other space? And you know, is there a digital divide? You know, are you showing off that you are more wealthy than other people and so on? You know, so those are perhaps issues which, if we use this form of video conferencing for other things, I think will become more of an issue as time goes on. There was a classic, I think one of the questions put to one of the ministers at one of the number 10 briefing was a journalist for a new European magazine who decided he'd advertise his magazine by having a great big poster behind it, which was somewhat naughty, one would have to say. But maybe that's something we should do. We should have a big ibex sticker behind us or something.
It's interesting you're saying about people coming in and out of the meetings, which is I agree, is quite disruptive. And about whether people would actually do that if it was a physical meeting, and so people's different sort of expectations of a meeting, because it's online, that maybe there are some behaviours which wouldn't be happening if you were in a meeting and you were calling everybody to do that. It's sort of really interesting that people seem to make that distinction in their minds through the behaviour.
Sometimes it's not people's fault, it's the technology that's forcing that. So we have to try not to be too judgmental on that side of things. But yes. Okay, well, it's been a real challenge for our churches in inner city church, urban church in Portsmouth. We're not obviously having any services, such as is the case for nearly all churches. There was an interesting discussion to be had with some of the churches, or what I call migrant churches, which worship with us, who we thought might be more of an issue with having to stop having meeting for services. Fortunately, that worked out quite well. They were quite understanding. So that side of it. There's a big discussion in URC circles about what activities we continue to allow happening on our premises, whether they're essential or not. We have a soup kitchen that operates on a Wednesday. That's regarded as essential for the homeless people, so that's continuing. And there's another activity that's a social enterprise that works with children and, well, primarily young people and others who are with learning needs and trying to train them up in work and so on. And a lot of them were having mental health difficulties and really just climbing up the wall and in danger of harming themselves. So that, with the permission of the city council, that activity continued. But there was a big debate that needs to be had about that and what we could actually, under the legislation, allow to happen and what not. Would we have the police knocking on our doors saying, sorry, you're going to have to stop this activity? So that caused a fair amount of stress for us. We've coped by adapted, which is the question. We've adapted by using material the United Reformed churches were producing centrally, which is recorded material which you can download and listen to. And you also get a text, so you can actually read through the text. So that's managed to help us hold all the people together, because there's about a third of the congregation, as I've said already, who perhaps are not technically literate and able to use stuff on the computer. And some of us are using, there's various churches which do live streaming and so on, and some of which is live and some of which is recorded but then played as if it's live. And that's been quite an interesting experience. And what that will mean for the future, I don't know. It'll be interesting once this is all over, what people want to do, whether they want to continue with that. But that's some of the ways we've adapted. And in terms of service of people, that's another adaptation. There's a lot of encouragement to church people to think about working with other voluntary groups and so on, not necessarily to start something completely new, but actually to work with other people and network. So that's how we've adapted. In Portsmouth, how about over towards the New Forest, Lisa?
Well, in the New Forest, I live in a small village, and the church has adapted really quite well. We've got a fairly new vicar for whom part of her role was actually to go beyond the church walls, and so she's certainly been going beyond the church walls at the moment. So we have services are streamed online. And we've actually also developed other sort of service offers. So now we have on weekdays at 9 o'clock in the morning, there's a prayer and reflection session. And one of the really strengths that I've found from that is that we've got other people who are not necessarily part of the church leadership or have been involved in doing any services or intercessions or reading the Bible, who have actually sort of said, I'd quite like to have a go at that. And so they've been on I think it's 4 days a week. They've been doing setting their own thing. They've been doing their own Bible readings and then just talking about them. And I think that's been quite powerful. We've had numbers have actually gone up week by week of people that are actually sort of logging into that, and we're up to nearly about 25 people, I think. The other thing is around the services. Is that we've moved them around, and it's just so that there are not too many conflicting messages. So that the Sunday service is at 10:30. We have a communion service on Wednesdays, which used to sort of fluctuate a bit, but everything now is sort of at 10:30. So people have got that in their mind. And we've also started going wider than just the church and its community. We have a local Facebook page, which is actually called Here Sway. The village I live in is called Sway, and that's where there's many people who are not actually involved in the church, but that's where we can actually put notes on about, there is a service, do you want to dial in, do you want to see? And we have had a number of people, again, the numbers of people that have been I keep calling it dialing in, but have been sort of going in for the video service has actually been going up, and there are some people that we don't know. So clearly it's I say clearly, but I think that probably it's about some people who maybe have wondered what goes on in a church but hadn't quite liked to go through the doors, have actually said, I can do this, I can do it anonymously, I can just dip my toe in and see what happens. I think then for me the question is, as we've said all the way through this, is what happens next? Do we continue to do it in this way? How do we balance it between, we also have a large number of people who are not actually very nervous about technology, very nervous about taking part in services in this way, but clearly we've got other people for whom this is a way of life, and so how are we going to balance that once the doors are actually open, I think.
Well, this is a fairly straightforward answer from us in Portsmouth in that we don't. We haven't quite got to that. The only thing we have done, which I think we've already mentioned, is we tried one elders meeting. These are monthly trustee meetings. We had one of those, which was the very first time I'd used Zoom. It was fun, I should say, in a very loose sense of the word, trying to chair and host the meeting. And given the dynamics of the people at our church, it was a challenging experience. Some of them weren't very good at this whole thing. So I think we sort of felt that perhaps we would try and keep in touch by other means more regularly, such as telephone and other means. We might do another conference for the elders meeting at some point when we've got a bit more confidence, but so far we haven't really used it for general keeping in touch, not at all.
Yeah, and I would say that that's my experience as well. We're mostly using sort of social media. We're using Facebook in particular as a way of actually making contact. I think the nearest thing that we have is that actually our vicar is, whenever we have a meeting with her, she actually does it face to face through video conferencing, which is actually really quite nice, particularly for a one-to-one experience. But we don't do it regularly. I think what we tend to do is actually take things like, for instance, the weekly newsletter, which always used to be printed, that now actually then goes out to people who are in the congregation and who are known to us. So yeah, it's interesting to know if that's something, as we say, when we look beyond lockdown, whether that's a way in which the sort of churches and organisations are going to reach out. I found it very useful. My mother lives in southern Spain, and so she's been subject to quite severe lockdown. However bad we may think it is in the UK, in Spain it's actually been quite hard. And so it's been really, really, really useful for me to not only talk to her on the phone, which is but actually see her. And she's actually felt quite good that she can see me as well when she's talking, so that we both know that each other are all right. So that's been really, really useful for me. What about you, Tim?
No, haven't quite picked up the confidence to do that. My father's on to us to try to do that. Yeah. He's down in Devon, but so far speaking to him on the phone has been sufficient. So
yes, yeah. I think yes. I think that there are, as we've talked about the sort of digital divide. If you don't have, the broadband width to be able to do that, if you're not used to using laptops or Facebook or anything like that, I think there is a problem. But I don't see why it couldn't be used by anybody, really. What do you think, Tim?
I've got mixed feelings, I think. Right. In theory, I think people should be able to use it. I don't think people should be excluded. But I think, like with a number of other areas in the whole technical digital way, I think there are issues about, training people up. I mentioned this to other people before. A friend of mine used to do a course before he became a minister, which he called Computing for the Terrified.
Oh, right, yes.
To encourage people to think you can do that. And I think there is perhaps a task of encouraging, equipping, enabling people to do that.
Yes.
I mean, I find it quite fascinating how people who, just given a little bit of confidence and help, can then fly off and end up doing all sorts of things which they never ever thought they could do. So I think people, there is a danger of digital divide as well. There's obviously having the right technology and the cost of it as well. That's another issue, although these days a lot more things can be done on the phone as well, and I think the particular platform we're using at the moment can be done via a phone as well as playing on a computer, and most people have phones these days. So a lot of the potential barriers are scalable. I think there's also a question which you have to think about how you do it. So for instance, I was thinking about a meeting that I had, a conference, and there were people on that conference call who I'd not seen for several years, but because of the way the meeting ran, you had the conference and that was it. You didn't have the opportunity to stop and talk to people afterwards over coffee or the water cooler and so on. And I really missed that on that particular call. So if you can build it into the meeting, but it does mean you have to think about how you structure the meeting and how you structure the event to allow that to happen.
Yes.
So those are the things I think I would throw into the mix.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree about that, about the sort of conferences and no time to talk, because as I mentioned earlier, having to do what would have been a residential training course, to do it online. Part of the joy of residential courses is actually the interaction in between the teaching and also in the evenings as well, and that wasn't there, and so the experience was actually quite different for all of us, although we did actually do, you know, the learning bit went okay.
Well, based on the last few weeks, some of what I've noted down a few things here. One is, I think, don't neglect preparation work.
Yes.
So if it is a meeting or a board meeting or a conference, you know, which has got a business agenda to it, doing some preparation work, publishing out the agenda and so on, really aids the interaction. So for example, the board meeting, which we've referred to earlier, a PowerPoint had been prepared, and that really helped us to be able to work through it. So that preparation work is important. I think the other thing is, I mean, by and large, it's been a positive experience, as we've been saying throughout this conversation. But I think, you know, the more people who join, it's important to, you know, do basic things like mute everybody when they come in,
yes.
Because that causes all sorts of feedback problems and so on. What else have I put? Well, maybe Lisa, you might have something to throw in here.
Yeah, I was going to say sort of similarly. I would say one of the things is give it a go, but actually, why do you want to do it by a video conference rather than, for instance, a telephone conference? And it might just be, you know, is it just because you just want to see everybody because you haven't seen them for a long time? But it might be, as you said, that the kind of meeting actually lends itself far quicker to just dealing with it through a telephone conversation. And I certainly would agree that we need ground rules as well. For my college course, there were 12 of us that were on the course, and it was quite clear that the tutor had sort of control and muted everything, and then we can engage. It can be a bit stilted, but actually I think if we learn to actually use those kind of use those ground rules, and the other thing I would say is make sure that everybody knows how it works, because there are sort of basic things where you've got people going, where is the mute button? I don't know. And so maybe if it's the first time you're doing it, is actually I think was very useful for another group that I was with, was we had a little session beforehand before we actually had the meeting, just so that we could say, right, this is the system that we're using, this is where everything is, and this is what would happen. So I think it's preparation, both in terms of for the content of the meeting, but also can you use it as well.
And I was just going to throw in, I think within that, that's one way of empowering people, as you would hopefully empower people in relation to normal meetings, if I could put it that way.
Yeah.
I do wonder if some people might, even if it's unconsciously or subconsciously, get excluded and not able to contribute, you know.
Yes.
So, and some of the basic things you would do in chairing a meeting to try and ensure that everybody's able to contribute and feels confident in contributing, I think are important, particularly for business things and so on, so that people don't get excluded and left out, even inadvertently.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I think there are some other practicalities, is that it is about timing of meetings as well, that they don't go on too long, or that you have a break, because it is more tiring, and certainly I find, staring at a screen than it is actually sort of face to face as well. So being aware of that. And the other thing that I would put in, which did make me laugh as I was thinking about it, is you are going to be on camera and you are going to be seen, so brush your hair and make sure that you actually, you know, that you're dressed properly, you know, something like that. You can do a telephone call in your pajamas, but not one of these sessions. But
basically, it's been a largely positive experience, with all those caveats put in there, and I would encourage people to at least give it a go, and if it helps, keep us in touch. It's certainly better than not being in touch at all and wondering what's happening in the community. And your
Yes.
particular organisation.
Yes, yes, I would agree with that. I would say, you know, give it a go, and if it doesn't work for you, then that's fine. But you don't really know until you've actually taken the step into the water.